debate about Sweden's asylum policy.
Yeah, as you say, Sweden has taken in a number of refugees from Uzbekistan, but putting that in context, nowhere near as many as it has from other countries. So 10 years ago, there were less than 500 people from Uzbekistan living in Sweden. Now it's about 3,500. But in 2015, when Sweden took in record numbers of asylum seekers, 160,000 people, the majority of them were from Syria and Iraq. And I have to say, really very few debates in recent months and years about this group from Uzbekistan. It has tended to focus on other nationalities. But as you say, there is an ongoing debate about immigration here in Sweden. There is rising support for the Nationalist Party here. A lot of the mainstream parties in recent months have really toughened their line on immigration here. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. A lot of people in Sweden still in shock, but others saying that it was potentially an inevitable attack given what we've seen elsewhere in Europe and the tensions that there have been here in Sweden around immigration.
Andy Savage, thank you. Let's talk now to Dan Smith. He's director of the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Good morning to you.
Morning.
It's early days, of course. There's a lot we don't know. But do you think that this is likely to, if you like, ignite the debate that's been going on, not just about immigration, not just about asylum, but crucially about integration in Swedish society?
I think there's going to be a spike upwards in the discussion, yes. Whether that makes a fundamental change, I'm not so sure. I mean, the big impact on the way that people live and experience their society in terms of numbers of immigrants and asylum seekers has really been unfolding since 2015 when, as was just said, 160,000 arrived from the Middle East, Afghanistan and the Horn of Africa.
And then years,
so I think,
after years of having a very open door, a decision was taken by the Swedish government to effectively close it, wasn't it? And do what was described as the EU minimum.
Yes, to tighten it, saying that, well, we had done enough, more than we should be expected to do in Sweden, and therefore it was time for a tighter attitude. And I mean, one of the first policy responses to yesterday's event is that it's been announced that border security regulations are being tightened and extended, and that both will affect the bridge from the bridge from Copenhagen into southern Sweden, and possibly also being able to do internal controls. It will be a kind of partial suspension of the Schengen Agreement.
More use of identity cards, more use of checks.
Yes, that's right. So it wasn't the random checks, I don't know. And this has come from, as I understand it, from the National Police Authority, and so it hasn't yet been a government cabinet decision.
There are some who argue, indeed our security correspondent Frank Gollum, who was reporting this yesterday, that the Swedish intelligence services simply don't think they have the powers they need to make the checks they need to find potential suspects.
That's very often said, but in my experience it's said very, very widely. It does seem to be the case that just like the military usually wants more money, security services usually want more powers. And I'm not really sure that if you looked at Sweden and its relative peacefulness, I mean, there was a terrorist attack 7 years ago. It's one, and everybody remembers it and knows what happened in 2010 when an Iraqi man blew himself up with a bomb belt. I'm not sure you would look at Sweden and say this is clearly a country that needs more intrusive checks right now. Some tightening, I think, would be probably wise.
Dan Smith, thank you very much indeed.
It is 18 minutes past 7. Yes, indeed. Puffins.
And we all feel on a Saturday morning.
Sounding a little bit as if they've just been told something interesting, which perhaps means that we should make the same noise, because we have something interesting to learn about puffins. Puffin couples that roam together, raise their kids together, and seem to be more successful together. Annette Faye is the Oxford Research Fellow who has discovered this. Morning to you.
Good morning.
Tell us about your studies.
So this study was trying to investigate what pair methods do during the migration. They found this really strong pair of breeding teams throughout their lives. But we didn't know what happened during the winter when they're away from the colony. So we tracked their movements and we found that they migrate together while they follow the first part of the non-breeding season. And the closer closer they stay together, the better they do the next season at breeding. They start breeding earlier and their chicks are healthier.
So this has a real impact. This monogamy has a real impact on their life chances.
Yes, absolutely, and they have to form strong pair bonds and they sort of pair life for at least many years. And so it looks like perhaps by following similar migration routes as well, this helps them keep the pair bond and perhaps return together to the colony in spring to breed.
And you think a penguin's doing that? I mean, it's a similar picture, was it?
I don't know. I think there was one study of penguins. It was conclusive. It looked like the pairs were just migrating to different places. So it might not be all long-term seabird species. It might just be puffin.
Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting. So you think that what you discovered about puffins, because I know some penguins, I certainly believe, isn't it, that some penguins are monogamous or Syrian monogamous, but you're saying what you've discovered with puffins is a kind of step up.
Well, I think there are many other species, including penguins, who are monogamous, but we only see them as the colony. So every year they breed to the same mate. So what I found interesting, which we haven't found in any other species so far, is that there's also a link during the non-breeding season when they're migrating.
Yes, it's the actual travelling together that's interesting here.
Yeah, so following similar routes, yes.
So what will you do next? Because you can follow this up in all sorts of ways, I suppose, can't you? Are you going to do more with puffins? Are you going to take it to other species?
So I have more plans to continue our work in puffins. So at the moment I'm studying puffins on Scania Island in southwest Wales. But I'm now collaborating with lots of people studying puffins in other big colonies in Iceland and Norway to try and do similar studies at a much bigger scale to try and understand their movements at sea, especially during the winter when we can't see them and we have no idea what they're doing or where they are.
Annette Faye, thank you very much for talking to us.
Time now 20 minutes past 7. Syrian jets have taken off again from the very airbase, which was the target of 59 US Tomahawk missiles. Ben James is our Middle East correspondent, and if, as a gesture, if nothing else, Ben, this must be hugely satisfying to the Assad government.
Yes, Nick, this is a report through the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, this opposition news service, British base that monitors developments in Syria through contacts on the ground, and they say that their sources near the Shirat Air Base saw 2 planes taking off. They also link those planes to strikes on so-called Islamic State targets near Palmyra, that city that has gone back and forth between government and IS control. Now, we don't know whether they're Syrian or Russian planes. It's actually very difficult to distinguish between the two in this battleground. And also we hear from the AFP news agency. They spoke to a military source. They said that they got the warning hours before the strike to be able to move some of their aeroplanes to other areas. That's what they're being told. Now, of course, through the deconfliction line that the US and Russia have been operating, there's a question mark about the future of that line now, though, of course, the Americans did notify the Russians of the strike. Therefore, the Russians, we've told the Syrians, and if it was hours before the strike, then maybe the Syrians managed to get some of their hardware out of the firing line. Don't forget, this base is something like 4 square miles in size. The runways are both 2 miles long. There's 2 of them. There are dozens of buildings there, so even with 59 cruise missiles hitting, if indeed they all did hit, there may well have been parts of the airbase that were left in operational enough sort of state to be able to use today and yesterday in these latest launches. We have some footage from Russian state TV journalists that seem to show shrapnel on the runway but no massive damage, although of course we couldn't see all of it from those pictures.
Meantime, the war of words goes on. Syria's Deputy Foreign Minister was on Newsnight last night claiming that the chemical and weapons attack was indeed a fabrication designed to change US policy.
And all of the voices from the Syrian government and military have continued to hold the line on what they have been saying ever since we began to see those pictures from Khan Shakun on Tuesday of those many children suffering the effects that pretty much everybody does now agree, I think, even on the Syrian and Russian side, that was exposure to chemicals. Of course, the argument from the Syrians, the Russians and their allies is that the chemicals were stored on the ground, they were not deployed
bumpy day today if you're already on the road for the East Midlands or from the West Country. Good luck getting to Twickenham, and indeed for people in London who are going to Wembley for that match as well. But there is another very big sporting occasion, of course, today as well, and Richard Conway is there. Morning, Richard.
Good morning, Justin. Good morning, Nick. It is Grand National Day. You're right. I'm talking to you from the winners' enclosure at Aintree. The final preparations are underway. There's around 72,000 spectators going to be arriving here through the gates within the next few hours for the 170th edition of what is the world's most famous horse race. Now, more on that in a moment, but first to golf and the Masters and what is turning into an intriguing first major of the year. Our correspondent Ian Carter has more from Augusta.
We have a congested but high-quality leaderboard with Sergio Garcia in an ideal position to end his long wait for a first major title. The 37-year-old Spaniard carded a 3-under par 69 to share the lead with Charlie Hoffman, Thomas Peters and Ricky Fowler. The American 67 was the lowest round of another difficult day. The chasing pack is littered with potential winners. Justin Rose is 3 behind. Former champions Phil Mickelson, Jordan Spieth and Adam Scott are within 4, and Rory McIlroy is still in touch, 5 strokes behind.
In football, England's women drew 1-1 in a friendly with Italy last night, and Brighton returned to top the championship with a 2-1 win away to QPR. Rugby union, yes, you're right, Justin, it is a big day ahead. There were wins last night for Sale and Newcastle in the Premiership. Meanwhile, the former England forward Brian Moore, as Ricky says, saved his life. Now, back at Aintree, 40 horses will line up in the Grand National late this afternoon, and jockey Danny Cook is taking part for only the second time in his career, but he will ride Definitely Red, a 10-to-1 shot that could stop his favourite.
You have to get something that stays well, and I think I've got that on my land. So literally, I just think if I do get clear round the top road on the one, they all have to be. I visualise everything up until we get into the elbow. It's just getting over that last fence, and then the rest will take care of itself.
Well, more from Danny Cook in an hour's time. Meanwhile, trainer Lucinda Russell is hoping her horse won for Arthur to deliver a victory for Scotland for the first time since 1979.
It's a dream to have a runner in the National, but it's an even bigger dream to have a horse that's got such a great chance. And I suppose once you're down here as a trainer, there's nothing more that we can do. We've done all our preparation. It was more tense really for us the last couple of weeks and trying to get him in the best possible shape. The roar goes up. It's just amazing. It can't help but make the hair stand up on the back of your neck. It's one of the most exciting days of our year, really.
Yeah, there's something about this race that just captivates public and trainers and jockeys alike. What is it about this race that's so special?
It's just magic. You know, I remember when I was 10 being so excited and watching it, and I think even people that don't really follow racing all the time, that they still get involved in it. It's a big test. It's a lot safer than it ever has been, and I think the executive have done a fantastic job with making the fences much more fairer for the horses. But it's still a big test. It's over a long distance, and at the end of it, it's the horses with the big hearts and the ability, but also with a bit of luck that win it.
You've described One for Arthur as a horse of a lifetime. Tell us a little bit about him.
He is. When we bought him, we've always wanted to run him in staying chases, and this is the ultimate staying chase. So he's a lovely horse. He's a big horse. He's just so kind, and I think these athletes, the best horses that we have in the yard, they all have this common thing about them. They're so noble. They're so sensible. And while we've been getting so overexcited and tense about the Grand National, he's quite happy and relaxed in the stable, and I think that probably is what makes him such a great horse.
Well, finally, the racing tips both in the Grand National. Number 14, Cause of Causes, and number 29, Vicente.
I will be coming to you, Richard, if I don't win money later this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed. Next week on BBC Radio 4, the programme which captures contemporary Britain in a unique way. Cheers.
strike, but officials in Washington have indicated that yesterday's cruise missile attack was intended as a one-off. The White House is also preparing more economic sanctions. Damascus has denied ordering the poison gas strike on Tuesday, which killed dozens of people. Its ally, Russia, has condemned the US action as a flagrant violation of international law. President Trump and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping have agreed a 100-day plan for trade talks to boost American exports and reduce the US trade deficit with China. Mr. Trump also accepted President Xi's invitation to make a state visit to China. Police in Stockholm say a man arrested on suspicion of committing a terrorist act through murder is thought to have been the driver of the delivery lorry. 4 people died and 15 were injured when the stolen vehicle sped down a pedestrianised street before plowing into a department store. The armed Basque separatist group ETA has reportedly begun the process of surrendering its weapons and explosives. The AFP news agency says the organisation has given French officials a list of 12 arms caches located close to the Spanish border. The chief executive of Ford has said he cannot guarantee the company will keep manufacturing in the UK after Brexit. Mark Fields told BBC News it was really important for the UK to secure a free trade deal with the European Union. He said Ford was going to be in the UK for quite some time, and that nothing could be guaranteed over many years. A 14-year-old boy arrested in Coleraine in County Londonderry has been charged with attempting to obtain a gun and ammunition. Student Radio reported Ballymena this morning. A 24-hour strike by workers at 3 rail companies is likely to disrupt the travel plans of people going to Aintree for the Grand National this afternoon. Members of the RMT union, working with Merseyrail, Northern and Southern, have walked out in a row about staffing the driver-only trains.
Thank you, Carolyn. It's 29 minutes to 8. We know why he did it. He says that he was moved by the sight of babies dying after a chemical attack. But no one seems to have much of an idea what the man who ran for office, warning again and again against involvement in Syria, will do next, if that is Donald Trump himself actually knows. General John Allen was commander of ISAF, International Forces in Afghanistan, before he went on to become President Obama's special envoy to the coalition to counter Islamic State. I've been speaking to him and I asked whether the US now needs a new military strategy in Syria.
Our difficulty in Syria has been that we had a military strategy with respect to the so-called Islamic State, but we had a political aspiration with respect to the removal of Bashar al-Assad from the political process. And we never really had a connective tissue, if you will, between the two. And we've always said, regardless of the administration, regardless of the observer, we've always said that there is no military outcome for the problems in Syria. It has to be a political outcome. Now, the military situation can perhaps shape the political outcome, and I think that's what the Russians saw. They judged that the U.S. would not act militarily or decisively in Syria and took the opportunity to brace up their failing client. And while I think they believe that there's no military outcome, they chose to try to shape the political outcome with the use of military force. And I think the American use of military force now will probably have to be factored in to everyone's consideration about where this goes at a political level, not just at a military level.
A few days ago you were calling for the Syrian Air Force to be grounded in effect by American military action. It would take a lot more than this strike to do that, would it not?
Yes, it would. And there's, the ways to do that, of course, some of which relies on an attack on the infrastructure, cratering of runways, attacks on aircraft revetments, attacks on fuel depots. Going after the infrastructure is one way to do it. Going after the pilots is another way to do it. Employing near autonomous systems, which we're seeing now, employing smart systems, employing special operations. I mean, there's a long combination of ways to do this. But as long as the Syrian Air Force flies, then we have the barrel bomb problem. We have the potential for him to continue to attack with impunity his unarmed and innocent civilian population. So I think we've at least seen an indication that this administration has reached an end of American patience on that issue. Your question, though, belies the bigger issue, and that is there a coherent policy that has been formulated that is behind this attack, from which then we have context for further decisions on restrikes, reattacks, or further attacks as time goes on.
If there is a new strategy or policy, it's dramatically different from America First, Donald Trump's promise before he became president. Does that suggest to you that he's changed his mind, or perhaps that the people around him General Mattis, McMaster, maybe they're in control?
No, I wouldn't use terms like that. I think that there is always going to be a moment in the youth of any presidency, if you will, where the rhetoric of the campaign has a head-on collision with the reality of the world, and then adjustments have to be made. You know, the president said just recently that he was the president of the United States, wasn't the president of the world, but last night in his public condemnation of Assad and his explanation of the strike, he called for I think he called it the community of civilized nations to join with him in condemning this and taking action. So for the president today, he's going to have to square his views about putting America high in his priorities versus his views about whether the United States should occupy the position of global leader. I think the reality of what he's discovering is that it's far more about the latter than it is about the former. There's no reason why America can't figure prominently in his priorities, but at the same time recognize that there are very few nations on the surface of the planet that can act or react to these kinds of crises. And the United States is, frankly, just about the only one. There is really a moral obligation, and the president seems to be conveying that he struck out of a sense of moral obligation and moral outrage. There's a moral obligation for the United States to lead in the world, and I think I wouldn't propose to offer what the president is thinking at this particular moment, but I do believe that the reality of the challenges he faces with Kim Jong-un and the regime in Tehran and the regime of Bashar al-Assad, those realities are going to require him to think very clearly about the role that he wants to play as the president of the United States in this global environment.
How surprised, how pleased are you by that transition, given that you were a prominent critic of Donald Trump's before he became president?
Well, I'm very happy that the United States would be prepared to take a leadership position in a way that could demonstrate a resoluteness and an assertiveness that dictators and tyrants need to be attentive to. My criticism of the president during the campaign was much more along the lines of what he was calling for the military to do, which I was concerned crossed the lines of legality, torture, and those kinds of things, versus a criticism of his policy objectives. So I think we're all waiting for him to announce his policy with respect to the Middle East and Syria in particular. But we're also waiting for an understanding of the policy with respect to China and East Asia and our relationship with Western Europe and NATO, and certainly our relationship with Russia. All of these are very important directions for the United States, and this is a young presidency still, and we're looking forward, I think most of us who are watching this process, we're looking forward to some clarity on this, because it's the clarity of the policy that gives you the context for the attack in Syria.
But you believe that there should be potentially further military action in Syria. It should not be simply a one-off.
Well, military action without a political context is meaningless. Great powers should not get angry. Now, I understand the president's being horrified over this issue. I understand that. I think we all are horrified over this issue. But it should not be out of anger or emotion that we should use military power. Military power has no context except insofar as it furthers political objectives. So we're hoping that this strike has a political context to it, and that context can be clarified by a coherent U.S. policy with respect to the region and Syria.
Finally, what do you say to people who argue that the experience in Iraq, the experience in Libya as well, suggests that airstrikes frequently exacerbate the problem on the ground and may even be dealing with the wrong enemy when the real enemy is Islamic State?
Well, there's no question the real enemy is the Islamic State. But let's, at a very crass level, let's just do the numbers. The vast majority of the 500,000 or so forced Syrians who suffered so terribly, and the millions who've been displaced from their homes that are awash in the region in the frontline states and in Europe. That's a direct result of Bashar al-Assad and the civil war, which ignited because in the spring of 2011, the youth of the country called for reform. Rather than to even countenance reform, decided to make war and peace. So yes, the Islamic State is a horrific enemy. We need to take the measures necessary to eliminate it. But the true reason for the crisis in Syria and the crisis in the frontline state and the crisis of refugees in West
before the strikes, the Daily Mirror suggesting President Trump's decision was influenced by tweets posted by his daughter, describing apartheid as images of Britain. The Times provides details of the Tomahawk missile that did damage, said 1,000 miles ago, with such a high degree of accuracy that it's claimed.
The Guardian says that 20 Russian officers had been inside the airbase when a shell filled with sarin was loaded onto a Syrian jet. Though it says US intelligence has not established whether the Russians knew of the planned attack. The Express says there are growing fears that President Trump's response could be the opening salvo, not war between the world's two biggest military powers. The Mirror's political editor, Jack Blanchard, writes that any sustained Western attack will bring the world to its most dangerous point since the end of the Cold War.
Disturbing images of a terror attack in Stockholm being used across the papers, bodies lying on the ground, blankets, stolen lorry, grainy CCTV still image of the suspect. The Daily Mail described it as a copycat Trump attack.
According to the FT, Brussels is planning to exclude the UK from the regular updates on EU trade policy because of concerns it could take advantage of sensitive information to gain its own post-Brexit deals. Many EU leaders are said to be worried that Britain could outbid the EU in future negotiations, despite the government promising to be loyal while it remains a member state.
And the Oscar-winning actress Linda Jackson offers a theory in the Daily Mirror about why mumbling is such a problem in modern television drama. Veteran actress believes younger thespians are being denied the chance to hone their craft in the theatre.
Time is 18 minutes. Time for this week's author interview. Jim Cockty has been speaking to the novelist Scarlett Thomas about her switch to writing for children and the creation of a fictional world full of magic.
We all know what it's like to get lost in a book. Well, Scarlett Thomas, after writing 9